Denver Community Active Living Coalition, part of DOTI, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. So we are glad to welcome you today to our Streets for People Summit and also Denver Streets Partnership, our co-host. So welcome. I'm glad you're here and that you can participate with us today. For our virtual keynote, we have Elena Madison from Project for Public Spaces, Director of Projects, and then the Director of the On-Ramp Program, Nancy Young, for Fountain House.
Good evening, everyone. Hi. Well, we've been doing Zoom and sharing online for 2.5 years, but you never know how it's going to go. So, can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for having us. Tonight's topic, I guess, conversation is about places of social inclusion and how we can all work together to address homelessness and mental health needs in public space in a much better way. And tonight, Shaylee was kind enough to introduce me. I'm Elena Madison. I'm the Director of Projects at Project Public Spaces. And my co-conspirator tonight is Nancy Young, who is the Director of On-Ramps at Fountain House. And you're going to hear more about what Fountain House is and what On-Ramp is in a little bit of time. So I work for Project Public Spaces. We're a not-for-profit planning, design, and implementation, but also education and advocacy organization. And we call the work we do placemaking, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that at this point. People are talking about placemaking. Lots of people are doing amazing work in placemaking. I think what we want to talk to you about is how placemaking can actually be really meaningful, substantial work for social inclusion, and how through social inclusion we can address the needs of people experiencing homelessness, mental illness, addiction, and other vulnerable or underserved populations in public space, and do this work from an inclusive perspective. So our goal with building places for social inclusion is actually to be very intentional and build social environments where people with special needs and people who are vulnerable can actually get the support and the connection to the community that they need. The social environment, the way we see it, is the mix of intentional and spontaneous social and psychological experience that people have with each other in a place, sometimes private place, but in our case, we're talking about public space, public place. These experiences can have very positive impacts on behaviors and beliefs and extend way beyond the experience of a particular place. So social environments, just like physical environments, need ongoing management, programming, and special attention to be successful. So obviously, over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've heard a lot, and we've had a lot of conversations about homelessness, mental illness, and other problems that they've become much more visible in public space, and they continue to be a challenge for many of us place practitioners, but also for organizations that operate and manage and program public spaces, and for the people who plan, design, and make public spaces happen. We all know that visible homelessness in public space is something that is not new. And for many downtown public spaces, it has been something that has been around for a long time. Yet, for a long time, we really haven't talked much about those challenges, and it's been a little bit of a shameful secret for many downtowns and downtown spaces. And more often than not, homelessness in public space is being looked at from an operational perspective. It's as something to manage, police, enforce, hide, dilute, or relocate, move somewhere else. So in this photo that you see, there is someone laying on a lawn in a downtown park in Atlanta, and that behavior is kind of perceived as negative. But laying down in a park is obviously interpreted very differently depending on who people think you are. So this is Gantry Plaza in New York City. And yes, laying on the grass, laying in a hammock is totally positive and embraced. Laying down on the sidewalk or even in the street, again, can be interpreted very differently depending on who people think you are. And of course, letting people lay on a city sidewalk has been considered undesirable, yet in a sanctioned public event, it's something that people cheer and support and think is very meaningful. So we see a lot of double standards in terms of behaviors and how they're being controlled in public space. There are many subtle cues that are used to stigmatize the most vulnerable in our communities in public space. And for example, for years, Bryant Park was not allowing people experiencing homelessness in the park with their many bags. And this is, for clarity, this is not a photo of Bryant Park. I don't believe they have this policy anymore, but that was the case for many years. And of course, the rules against bags do not apply to tourists or shoppers downtown. So we have these double standards. But at the same time, we've seen municipal governments around the country pouring millions of dollars in programs aimed at addressing homelessness, and specifically street homelessness and chronic mental illness and addiction, with modest results. The current approaches, other than policing, of course, are really focused on ignoring or pushing people that are considered undesirable to different areas. This is a photo of Skid Row in LA. So obviously Skid Row did not happen by accident or overnight. Sometimes when places are perceived as having challenges, we just close them down. So this is another example of a park in downtown Atlanta where they just closed this area of the park because they felt that they couldn't handle or manage the people who were spending time there. And of course, we use outreach teams that, you know, especially in New York, are very prevalent. We see them a lot, and they tend to be stigmatizing and not always effective. According to New York City's own reports on the cost, only 33 cents is actually spent working with people experiencing homelessness on the street. The remaining 67 cents on every dollar spent on homeless outreach actually goes to the teams just walking around, looking for people, administration, and overhead. So what is the problem with these approaches that we've seen so far? They tend to be very expensive. They're not very effective. Oftentimes they're unpopular, and they don't leverage public space. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the budget, and this is actually the New York City budget for fiscal year 2018. So those numbers have changed a lot over the last 3 years. But in 2018, the New York City spent $115 million just on street homelessness, and almost $3 billion on addressing homelessness, which is a stunning figure. For perspective, the city budgeted $2.2 billion for the fire department, $1.7 billion on sanitation, and 1.1 billion for libraries, parks, and cultural affairs for the entire city altogether. So the numbers are staggering, but we're not doing very well. We believe that there is an opportunity here for public spaces to be a missing link in the delivery of services, in connecting to people, and in really connecting to people as human beings, as full individuals. Public spaces are accessible and already are drawing people. There is a reason why people are in those public spaces. Public spaces are already multi-use, multiple things are happening there if they're successful public spaces. And they represent our community spirit. They represent civitas. They really are the nexus. And as planners, designers, urbanists, placemakers, we all engage with communities and stakeholders when we vision or manage or design public spaces on a myriad of issues. And they're not directly associated with public space or planning or design. And we talk to experts, to partners, to people who know more than us about education, culture, job creation, economic development, community services, food security, safety, public health. The list goes on and on. Yet very often we tend to relegate the social inclusion issues to the realm of policing and cleanup. And public spaces are the places where really we can grow trust. We can grow social networks with people who have challenges and needs in their life. And those social networks really naturally occur in public space. They're the logical place to grow trust, especially for people who have trust issues. And in the end, placemaking and public spaces have always been about people. So public spaces should help us humanize those in need, and they should be the places where we connect as people. And we know we can do so much better than what we've been doing so far, what the old ways of doing this work has been. So what can we do? We can understand better the culture and the experience of people who are living on the street or experiencing unhoused homelessness, and people who are in different programs and have other challenges. We can support trust agents, and I'll talk a little bit about who they are and what that means. And we can empower people, the people we want to reach, especially in public space. So to trust agents, one of the most famous examples these days of the trust agents is the example of the Friendship Bench, which comes to us from Zimbabwe. And it was actually a way for Zimbabwe to expand the access to therapy for the people in the country by using community health workers. So those benches, it wasn't really about the bench, it was the people on the bench that were people from the community, and they were trained as lay health workers to become therapists and advisors to other people in the community, and they were called community grandmothers. It's a great example, everybody loves it. Well, New York City's former First Lady's program called New York Thrive attempted to use this model. And this is how it was implemented in New York City. And you can see it looks very, very different. I believe that they completely misunderstood the model. The Friendship Bench was rolled out in New York City with great fanfare and kind of disappeared quietly. But as you can see, it's very different from what a bench looks like. It looks like a construction element. It's bright orange. So it doesn't really acknowledge the stigma of people experiencing homelessness and what people experiencing homelessness and other challenges have to deal with on a daily basis. And it didn't really acknowledge who can be a trust agent. In addition to the stigma, the importance of predictability, of regularity, And just the general culture of the street was really not taken into account, and the program was not very successful. I think with public space, we can provide help in plain sight using the natural flows of space, being efficient, helping people create goals, and focus on people's strengths as opposed to symptoms or challenges. It's really about connecting to the healthy part of every person instead of focusing on their illnesses or difficulties, and helping people to work as a group and build connections to each other, and connecting to those strengths as a group. Through the work in public space, we know, for example, people experiencing homelessness or people who have other challenges may have a talent or ability to play music or teach or play chess or experience organizing people and objects. And those are all the strengths that we can use as we work in public space. So last year, I think last spring, we partnered, Project Public Spaces partnered with Fountain House. And they will, Nancy will tell you a little bit more about who Fountain House is and what kind of work they do. But it was really about creating a social environment in Times Square, specifically to attract, connect with, and address the needs of people experiencing homelessness. So from our designer and placemaking perspective, we try to create a space that is simple yet pleasant and obviously very easy to pack and unpack, but also a space that kind of engages people of all kinds. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my partner, Nancy, and she will tell you more about Fountain House and our common experience in Times Square. Nancy.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. I'm Nancy Young from Fountain House. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and tell you a little bit about what we've been doing since sort of the beginning of the worst part of the pandemic, where we started talking with community organizations. Fountain House is a really unique mental health organization that, for the most part, served its clients, who we call members, internally, and didn't have a lot of experience out in a public space. And during the pandemic, we turned our attention to people who were unhoused, people who were not getting food that they needed, people who were not being reached out to during that time. And we did that by partnering with some of the local community organizations in Times Square. And we also did that by partnering with Project for Public Spaces. But first, I'm going to take a quick minute to just tell you a little bit about Fountain House and why it's unique. We are a mental health rehabilitation program, and we work with adults with serious mental illness. We have a very different model than most mental health organizations. First of all, we think of ourselves as an intentional community. We call our clients members because they belong to it. And we call our beautiful space in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of Midtown Manhattan a clubhouse. The clubhouse was the first of its kind in 1948, and now there are over 300 all over the world. We train people at many of those clubhouses at Fountain House. And we look at ourselves as a rehabilitation community that basically works with people who come to us by choice. It's not a clinical model. It's not transactional. People don't come in by appointment, and they're not mandated to come to us. So when I say they come to us by choice, choice is an integral part of our model. People work side by side when they want to be there for as long as they want to be there. They can leave and go to work or school and come back. Take a couple of years off and come back. They're members for life. They help each other. They get to know each other. They build trust with each other. It's engaging work. It's rehabilitative work, and it's what we call social practice. So Fountain House serves about about 2,000 people a year with serious mental illness. And about 35 to 40% of those people come to us with a history of homelessness or housing insecurity. But at this stage, we also can say that we help people get housing once if they come to us with that insecurity or being unhoused, and 99% of our members are securely housed today. What we realized though is that in the intake process, when we're welcoming people into our community, but they're not yet members, is that was an opportunity when they're not yet members and they're struggling with different aspects of their life, that we could forge relationships and build trust at that time with them when they're dealing with a lot of their pressing needs. Like, for example, we can help them get food, we can help them get shelter, we can help them get IDs or to medical appointments or to see a psychiatrist. And so with that thinking in mind, during the pandemic, we started a pilot program to sort of help think about, well, how can we remove some of the obstacles or help people solve some of those basic needs while they're unhoused or having other challenges. And we joined forces with a couple of community organizations, one that's called a problem-solving court called Midtown Community Court, and one that's a street outreach organization called Breaking Ground. And again, with Project for Public Spaces. First, it started out as Fountain House was just the mental health component of a street outreach team. So it started out that we would just get referrals to Fountain House, and that was fine. We got some, but we realized that we needed to have a stationary place where people could come and spend time. And so we worked with Elena at Project for Public Spaces to create what we are calling a recharge station. So this is a place where it's right in the middle of Times Square in a pedestrian area. It's a beautiful blue, as you saw from the picture. It's got plants, and we serve fresh coffee, and we let people charge their phones, which is why we call it the recharge station. And we basically do still invite the street outreach workers to come and spend time there at the recharge station to meet people there. We ask our partners in the community to tell people, come on by for, some hot coffee and conversation. But really, we're doing what we do at Fountain House out in the community by using social practice to engage with people at the recharge station. And that's our main goal. Our main goal is not to increase membership at Fountain House or clubhouses, although that does happen sometimes that we do get some referrals to Fountain House. Our main goal is to do what we do at Fountain House out in the community. So we basically are focusing on offering a welcoming space where people can just come and sit down and chat. And the people behind the counter are Fountain House members. So they have the lived experience of often having been homeless themselves, having mental health struggles, and they bring themselves to the job, and they engage with people at the job. And so they're meeting people, they're asking them questions, they're getting to know them, they're offering to just sit and chat with them. And like I said, our goal is not to try to necessarily give people any, solve all the problems that they're struggling with. But if that trust is built and if that relationship starts to, feel like a connection, those needs are often brought up and those needs are then solved. We've worked with a lot of people to help them get into housing, into shelters, and also into, getting basic needs like food and IDs and other mental health needs, seeing a psychiatrist, seeing a doctor. But most importantly, what we're doing in the process is we're getting to know people and we're building trust, and people are coming back repeatedly. So we have a lot of repeat customers, basically people just coming back and saying, we really love spending time here. And then what we do is we engage with them. And our most important goal is to just try to say, hey, you're part of this community, you can be here. And what that counters, what that sort of flies in the face of is the isolation that a lot of people feel even in the middle of such a crowded city and the most crowded place in the city, which is Times Square, we have so many people who feel isolated, and this is an attempt to try to fight against that isolation and to make people feel accepted and like they belong. So one of our partners is the Times Square Alliance, which is a business improvement district that runs the whole pedestrian area in Times Square. They're in charge of the big ball drop on New Year's Eve. And they have actually shown us a great deal of appreciation. Not only do we get the space for free to do what we do, but they supply the generator and the gas, and they talk about us in their events. And they also help to fund the building of the recharge station. In addition, they bring by local elected officials and candidates quite often to visit the recharge station and to see, the work that we're doing, and also to introduce it as an alternative to just the sweeping up of encampments and the throwing people out of the subway that's been happening recently. And then, as Elena pointed out, as an alternative to the outreach teams, which, are necessary, but it is our intention to be something that is different than just outreach. So, people do sit and spend time with us and fill out applications for housing and do work with social workers who come by. But like I said, it's really supposed to be a community, just like we have at Fountain House. And we're meeting with Project for Public Spaces consistently to try to improve the space and add new ways to engage people and try to work with creating new opportunities to find ways to talk with people and build relationships. One of the reasons I'm just ending on the topic of partnerships is just to underline that we feel that the importance of working with community partners who have different strengths and skills is really key to creating a solution, creating community, and also to just make sure that this is all about increasing a feeling of belonging for everyone who is using a public space. And I'm going to just end on that note and open up to any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, we're ready for questions.
All right, does anybody have any questions? All right, want to come up here for us, please? All right, can you still hear us on your side? All right. Just introduce yourself and your question.
Sure. Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and that sounds really amazing. I myself am a person who suffers with mental illness, and so I totally understand the struggle. Do your facilities offer an address for folks so they can perhaps get registered to vote, apply for services, et cetera, et cetera? Just out of curiosity.
We actually, the community organizations that are involved in this partnership have offered their own addresses for people to use. But that is a really consistent problem that we see. And that's the best way we've found so far to solve it, is just to let them have their mail sent to our locations. Great question, though.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. Well, we appreciate you for the presentation. I do not have a program, but I believe this is the end of this segment. Yes, so thank you, ladies, and we appreciate all that you presented, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, friends, and thanks for joining this evening. I'm Molly McKinley. I'm the Policy Director at the Denver Streets Partnership. I'm so glad that you're all here this evening for this conversation. And before I introduce our amazing panelists, I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. First, the topic of public spaces is really broad and complex, and we have about an hour for this conversation, which I'm sure will go by very quickly. I hope that you'll learn something and consider some new perspectives. I hope you'll go forward after this discussion and ask questions to hold decision makers accountable and advocate for approaches that you think will meet the needs of our community. This conversation is a small part of creating a city with welcoming public spaces, and it's up to all of us and many leaders who aren't in this room tonight to make the change. I also want to acknowledge that we have panelists here who represent a variety of organizations and agencies, which I will soon tell you about. But we only have one head of an agency here this evening, Deborah Johnson of RTD, spoiler alert for introductions. And I imagine that our conversation might reference Denver Union Station because it's been in the headlines over the last 6 months. But the issues our community is facing right now are complex, and I just want to be clear that RTD is not the only decision-making agency that has a part to play. We'll talk about some of those partnerships, where we need more leadership, where we need more collaboration, but just want to acknowledge that going into this conversation. Now, I'm excited to introduce you to these wonderful panelists and get rolling with our discussion. So first, I'll introduce Deborah Johnson here. She's the CEO and General Manager of RTD. And next to her is Kaylee Gates, who's a Community Resource Outreach Administrator for the Denver Public Library. Next to her is Lisa Ravel, who's the Executive Director of the Harm Reduction Action Center. And then lastly is Carly Salon, who is the STAR Operations Manager within the Denver Department of Safety. So now we'll get started with some questions. First, this one is for all of our panelists here. What does public space in Denver mean to you? And talk a little bit about how your work intersects with public spaces. So does softball get warmed up?
All right, I'm gonna swing. So first and foremost, I want to thank DOTI and the Denver Street Partnership for the opportunity to engage with you all this evening. So my qualifying statement would be this: public transportation is interwoven into the communities in which we serve, so it has a vital part in any aspect of a community. And so with that being said, with public transportation, the operative word in what I do is public, because we don't pick and choose who our customers are. So when we talk about public spaces, transit quite naturally is going to enable people to have access to said places. I think what's most paramount in relationship to all of that is that when we are planning spaces, transit needs to be at the forefront, whether we're building, places in which people congregate, where they reside, where they frequent for entertainment purposes. It's inherent, or not inherent, I should say, it's imperative that we are at the table collectively as we design these spaces so we can collectively address issues that plague society as a whole.
Thank you.
Oh, that's how it works.
Yeah, let's hear from all of you on this one. We'll have some questions that'll be specific to some of you, but we'll just get warmed up.
This is my first panel.
Well, this is my first panel too, my first moderating role. So,
it feels appropriate to follow Deborah because obviously Denver Public Library, we are a community space. We are maybe one of the only spaces that exists anymore where you can loiter. You can come in, you don't have to spend money, you can spend all day. That's not typically the way that it works at other agencies or even some public spaces now. So at Center Park, I'm looking at you. Yeah, that was a joke for some of us. I think that there is no intersection in our work at the library and public spaces. We are a public space, and we take that seriously. Free and equal access for all is something that we strive for, and we don't do it perfectly. Honestly, we struggle. It's difficult for a large agency that's in every single neighborhood in this county, in which every neighborhood is its own little microcosm, its own little environment that is so much different. And I think you kind of get a cross-section or a slice of everything that is going wonderfully well and all the resilience in a community, and you also get a cross-section and a really detailed view of all the ways that our community members are struggling and suffering. And I think that's uncomfortable for people. And I spend a lot of time, my philosophy related to public spaces in the library, I spend a lot of time talking about the difference between safety and comfort, and are you actually unsafe or are you uncomfortable? I take lovely RTD transit every day into work. I love the Zero.
That's how I got here.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of stuff that happens on the bus almost daily that makes me uncomfortable. but I think I really need to interrogate that internally, and I would challenge others who are involved in setting policy and working in agencies to further the narrative around, is this something that is actually threatening to your safety, or is this something that brings you discomfort? The end.
Thank you so much for that response. I think in preparing for this, thought a lot about the conversation about safety versus comfort and for who, and it's different for folks, and I appreciate you giving that challenge to folks to explore that. Lisa.
So the Harm Reduction Action Center is Colorado's largest public health agency that works specifically with people who inject drugs and people who smoke drugs such as crack, meth, and fentanyl. I am your go-to gal. Let's talk about drugs in public spaces. Ever heard of it? We were never too cute to think that fentanyl wouldn't come to Colorado, right? It's been on the East Coast since 2014 and in Colorado since 2018. When folks are unhoused, they use outside, in alleys, in parks, and in business bathrooms. Usually pre-pandemic, my folks were able to prioritize using in business bathrooms first for 3 reasons. 1 is you can close the door and the cops don't come up on you like they can in an alley. 2 is so the larger community and kids don't see them. And 3 is so they can have access to sterile water. When you shut down those public restrooms, then you are going to be seeing public drug use. And people have nowhere to use drugs. In a magical world, there'd be no drugs, but we live here, and there's one safe thing that folks can do today. So I do look forward to having conversations tonight about public drug use. I know what's happening at Union Station. I know what's happening at Civic Center. I know what's happening at the library. I know what's happening at the river before that. You cannot arrest your way out of drug use. It's not possible. If stigma, shame, and incarceration worked with drug use, we'd have wrapped this up years ago. All that's done is drive use underground, or people have got preventable chronic diseases such as HIV, hepatitis C, and died of overdose. And overdose is the leading cause of death of our unhoused neighbors in Denver and has been for years, and that is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And so when people overdose in public and when people die of overdoses in public, that means somebody has to find them. And it used to be cops. Now it's 17-year-old baristas or people that work in RTD transit stations that have to go back to work the next day and try to push forward. And it doesn't have to be like this. That's a teaser to let you know where we're going to get later on. But 76% of my folks are homeless or transitionally housed upon intake. I do think with the pandemic and with a lot of people being home all day, people do think they're seeing more homelessness or they're seeing more public drug use, where for 10 hours a day they would have been somewhere else. So I think, we really have to be talking about what that looks like, and also harm reduction increases public safety efforts in our community. Who has the red ribbon, red thing around there? Yes, harm reductionists, thank you so much. Everybody else, come on.
All right, well, Lisa didn't need a warm-up.
How did I get stuck in the spot?
You want to play musical chairs really quick?
Right? And thank you, Kaylee. I'm going to leave here and order a t-shirt that says, "Are you unsafe or are you uncomfortable?" I think, to me, when I think about STAR response and kind of my background in community behavioral health, public space is really one of the key places and most common places where the folks that I have served through my career are STAR and community outreach and community behavioral health really focuses on bringing clinical work outside of the 4 walls of a clinic, in places where you might not expect, on the side of a highway, in a park, in an alley, behind a dumpster. We will come out, we will contact you, and we will provide support. We will approach you with a non-judgmental attitude, and we will make sure that you are in the driver's seat of whatever it is that you need in that moment to get out of the cycle of crisis. And STAR is happy to provide that, and oftentimes we're doing that in public spaces.
Thank you. All right, Kaylee, this one is for you.
Oh, okay.
Just you.
Okay.
Unless anyone else has anything to add.
No, just Kaylee.
But I think she might be the only one. Speak a lot to the library. Can you talk to us a little bit about your philosophy about creating public spaces within the library system? You said you acknowledged the library is not perfect, although I think the library is pretty great. What's worked, what hasn't, and what can other agencies learn from your work and your experience so far?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the library struggles with is representation in the community. I think it's difficult for an organization to adequately serve its community when it's not representative. We're reckoning with our whiteness, and it's painful, and it's a tough process. So my suggestion to any, government agencies we know move at the speed of, I don't know, something.
The speed of government.
No, this is my analogy, a herd of turtles. A herd of turtles running through peanut butter.
Okay. Yeah, that is the speed at which the government wheel moves. So I think those of you representing nonprofit agencies can have the ability to be more agile, but I would say you need to focus first on your staff and ensure that the staff members that you have and are able to retain represent the communities that you need to serve, not just the communities that you want to serve. And I think you also would be remiss if you're somehow sitting up in your house of power, I don't know, I don't have any power in the library, but I imagine some people do, and deciding on the kinds of programs or services that should be offered without having any real connection to the community. Community members will always have a better idea of the services or access or anything that they need, and I think government would be well served or serve the taxpayers better to respond directly to those needs rather than dictate in kind of a paternalistic way what we think the community wants, which is tough. I can't remember the rest of your question.
Can you tell us a story, an experience that you've had that you're like, this is working, or we're really meeting people's needs? Tell us a positive.
And it's about transportation. Union Station.
Bonus points.
Yeah, we didn't fight. We worked very hard for many, many months to get the necessary parties involved to get access to a regular outreach site at Union Station, because we recognized that the Department of Safety and Denver Police were really working from an enforcement perspective. They've, at this point, have probably exceeded 1,000 arrests since January, and I think there's a statistic you have later showing that most of these are nonviolent. This is not a scary place. This is a place where people are suffering and using drugs in public spaces because they don't have anywhere else to go. We wanted to respond to that situation, so we roll up with our bookmobile and provide a mobile computer lab and a charging station and water and fellowship and connection and library services. It's been resoundingly successful, and now, so come down and see us on Tuesday mornings, right outside of Whole Foods. And then on Wednesdays, we're there with the Department of Public Health, behavioral health specialists, Department of Human Services, Mental Health Center in Denver, and other folks, just kind of like a pop-up care center right on the street. It's like a block party. It's great. We've had really wonderful responses from most community members. And I think it's a really good example, kind of hearkening to what Elena had mentioned about using these public spaces in a really powerful way. So let's do more of that, please.
I'm so glad you mentioned connection, and I, from the keynote speakers, was thinking a lot about, they use the word belonging and connection, and I think, coming out of the pandemic, we were disconnected for some time, and I think that missing connection is something that we're seeing even just amplified in these times right now. So thank you for mentioning that. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to what Kaylee shared, or questions? Okay. Let's see. This one's for you, Deborah. So we're talking about Denver Union Station. Denver Union Station's advertised as Denver's living room, but we've seen recent closings of restrooms, removals of electrical outlets, increased law enforcement, and it doesn't quite feel like my living room, at least. Can you talk to us a little bit about the thinking behind those decisions and what maybe some of the longer-term plans, what we can expect moving forward at Denver Union Station?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So I'd like to provide a backdrop, because I know oftentimes perception is reality. So I want to educate and inform as it relates to the closing of the restrooms in the bus concourse at Denver Union Station. So there was an incident where, let me just qualify this by saying, recognizing that I lead the Regional Transportation District, I feel at times that I'm failing because I cannot ensure that the men and women who comprise the agency have a safe place to work. And it's for a myriad of reasons. And so recognizing that I am contacted directly by employees telling me about different incidents that have occurred, it was Friday, December 4th. I made a decision to have the restrooms tested at Denver Union Station. And it was prior to December 4th, I got the results on December 4th. And there were trace amounts of fentanyl found in the restroom. Now, at this point in time, which I'm sure Lisa can attest, there's not a lot of, data relative to secondhand exposure from smoke and things of the like. And where we are, as a public transportation agency that are recipients of federal dollars, we have to adhere to drug and alcohol policies prescribed by the Federal Transit Administration. And so employees had been complaining about different aspects, headaches, impact to their vision, and a myriad of different things. So, with that, as we went forward, I found out about it, and I see a couple of my board members here, and I'm looking at Director Geisinger because I talked to her on Friday, December 4th, with her serving in the capacity of the first vice chair. I made the decision out of the abundance of caution to close the restrooms so we could bring in professionals to clean the restrooms. In doing so, our intent was to have those done. I went in on Saturday and I looked at the status of said restrooms. The sinks have been pulled off, well, not totally pulled off the wall, but were adjusted. We needed to do some work. In light of where we are, we have supply chain issues. When I made an announcement that it was our intent to open up the restrooms in January, that was our intent. Just today, you were speaking of the wellness clinic and all the outreach activities, I found out that we've been notified that we should have the doors for the restrooms within 8 weeks. Basically, they've been supply chain issues that have basically gone on for the past 5 months. It's not to keep people out. It's the nature of the beast in reference to what we're currently living in with all the residual impacts caused from the pandemic, what's going on in Ukraine and a myriad of different elements as well. So that's why the restrooms are closed. So talking more specifically about RTD, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, that was designed to be an open system. It really is not optimal in reference to the way it is designed. It's underground, there's concrete, it's not visually appealing, it's really not a place to congregate, but on the flip side of it, we have a myriad of different issues that need to be addressed. In doing so, quite naturally, working within government in and of itself, there are a lot of different issues, and as Lisa has pointed out, you can't, police your way out of this enforcement. That's not the answer. But then again, as a steward of taxpayer dollars, recognizing the importance of public transport, I have an obligation to make decisions with the information that's readily available. So as we look at changes to Denver Union Station, what we're doing is providing public transit underground with a bus concourse. The complex is open air, and it's supposed to be that. It's supposed to be Denver's living room in that vein. So what we're trying to do in earnest is create a system whereby, like most other transit agencies, some, we call the legacy systems pre-World War II, where you actually access the system by using fare media to open up a gate so you gain entry. That is what is underway. As relates to the outlets, while it may seem like we're shutting it off so people can't hang there, with people charging equipment, sitting there for 3 to 4 hours, we couldn't even power wash the station because we didn't have outlets. So it's important for me to come to forums like this so I can share information, because in the absence of information, people invent their own. Okay. So that's my response. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for providing that context. Like we said, these issues are complex, and there's just a lot of story that gets missing. But it also lends itself to just a lot of questions about, well, how can we continue to make sure that we can pressure wash the station, but also provide the things that people need access to? And I think we'll dive into that a little bit more in some questions here. Lisa, I've got a question for you. I've learned a lot from Lisa. I've known Lisa for about the last 6 months or so, and if you've talked to me in the last 6 months or so, I've probably fangirled to you about Lisa and the amazing work that she's doing. I've learned a lot about the concept of harm reduction, and I'm hoping that Lisa can share with us just kind of a basic understanding. What are some of the principles of harm reduction? And tell us a little bit more about your work, who you're serving, and what are some of the barriers to taking an approach to harm reduction? What are some of the things keeping 1,000 questions? Just you go, Lisa. Tell us about harm reduction, the work you're doing, and what keeps you from being able to do more.
You have 30 seconds. Got it. I'm ready to go. All right, so you've got prevention over here, you have treatment over here, you have criminalization of drug users here. All I'm going to talk about today is the life in the middle. In a magical world, there'd be no drugs, but we live here, and there's one safe thing that folks can do today. And we believe if people want to live a life of recovery, they shouldn't have to live with preventable diseases such as HIV and hepatitis C. We believe if people don't want to live a life of recovery, they shouldn't have to live with preventable diseases such as HIV and hepatitis C. Harm reduction reduces the harms associated with X. Today we're talking in relation to drug use. However, we use lots of forms every day in every way. Sand in a playground, helmets when riding a bicycle, designated drivers, reduces the harms associated with your drunkenness. So harm reduction is pragmatic. I am meeting you today for a healthier and safer you. How can I support you for a healthier and safer you today? And quite frankly, nobody knows you like you know you. So what I like that harm reduction isn't is, you know what you should do? That's parole and probation, right? How can I support you? And everybody needs somebody rooting for them. And a lot of times when people are unhoused, and especially with chaotic drug use, people don't think that they have anybody in their life that can be supportive. So I'm always out there like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? What's going on? So we create this, community in which, everybody rises to the occasion to be a good community member. So when we talk about syringe access, and we talk about naloxone, which saves people's life in the event of an opioid overdose, we talk about fentanyl testing strips, where folks can test their drugs to see if fentanyl or fentanyl analogs are present before they use. That's harm reduction 1.0, and we're there. And we need to talk about harm reduction 2.0. And harm reduction 2.0 means I can do everything right now at my fixed site to prevent and eliminate the transmission of HIV and hepatitis C, resources, referrals, naloxone, fentanyl testing strips, but it's not legal for them to use on my property. Use and possession on the property can get the property seized. So they go a few blocks away to an alley or a business bathroom or Union Station, and they use there often alone. Not only are they using there, they're overdosing there. Not only are they overdosing there, they're dying of overdoses in public places. It doesn't have to be like this. And this is the group to say, not one more person should be dying of an overdose in a public place. So I need your support pushing forward with this too, because Union Station is an injection site and a use site. We've got the library, civic center, the river. That's happening. We also need to talk about how we have a very unpredictable drug supply. Fentanyl is now being found in heroin, meth, and cocaine. It's also pressed into the blue pills. Heroin's almost gone. That's due to climate change and lack of poppy cultivation. So just like in 1920s alcohol prohibition, they weren't brewing cases of beer, they were making cheap, hard liquor. That's exactly what's going on. It's a synthetic opioid that's much easier to be made in the lab. My folks are smoking about 5 to 20 fentanyl pills per day. They're actually kind of pumped they're smoking. They're no longer having to inject, because anytime you break your skin, you're at risk of infection. One of the problems with smoking fentanyl is that you can still overdose, and a lot of people don't think you can overdose by smoking fentanyl. But it also smells like burnt rubber or an electrical fire. I wish it smelled like lilacs and lavender. But there's a lot of misinformation out there too, right? There's a lot of fentanyl madness. You can't overdose by touching fentanyl. It doesn't live in the air. The drug war has a great communications director, because if anybody's been paying attention the last few months in the Colorado State Legislature with that bad bill that happened, doubling down on the worst ideas of the drug war, which is criminalization and incarceration, you would know that the machine is really happening to make people fear people who use fentanyl, as though, as though the prohibition, criminalization, and the drug market brought us fentanyl. That's exactly what happened here. And it's going to bring us the next synthetic opioid. So we need to be having these conversations, and part of the issue too is that the war on drug users has been incredibly racist and classist since forever, but especially for the last 51 years. And more incarceration isn't going to work. And then we had DARE, and then we had Just Say No, and our tummies hurt. And so we really need to be talking about drug use. It's facts versus feelings. Anywho, so then what she's going to talk about is barriers. Barriers is where you go to an 11-hour testimony or a 14-hour testimony saying, this is what we need. We need overdose prevention sites and a safe supply, such as heroin-assisted treatment or pharmaceutical-grade stimulant. And they said, how about more incarceration? And we said, no, nobody asked for that. And they said, Done. So now we have a bill that's going to make every overdose death a murder investigation. It's called drug-induced homicides. It's happening in a lot of states around the country. Pennsylvania and Ohio are the top two that incarcerate. It's going to be mandatory minimum 8 years. It doesn't catch the cartel or even mid-level sellers. It's low-level sellers who are friends and family members. You can't arrest your way out of that. It's also OD mapping. So Deborah and I are hanging out doing drugs per the usual. She overdoses at my house. She lives. Now a couple days later, law enforcement are coming to my house to offer me services. All that's going to do is add surveillance in communities. So those are the top two reasons why no one's ever going to call 911 again for a medical emergency in the event of an overdose. Yeah. So now it's definitely on us. So everybody in this room, if you walk on Earth, or especially in Denver, I need you carrying naloxone or Narcan. Because they know, legislators and decision makers know that people are dying of overdoses. They just won't let it be with me. They'll continue to let it be at Deborah's place. But I also won't be running the shit show of Union Station, sorry Debs, because people are incentivized to rise to the occasion because it's the one safe space in the entire world they can talk realistically about their drug use. So, you know, people want to have these safe spaces, and when you push it underground and you push it into alleys, and then it happens very quickly, that's where a lot of times we have issues. So do I have barriers? Heck yeah, I got barriers. I got the communications director for the drug war putting all this fentanyl madness out there that, you know, fentanyl is not in cannabis. You can't vape fentanyl. Fentanyl doesn't go into a vape until 466 degrees, but most vapes only go to 216 degrees. Like, I have to be this like chemical nerd now because that's the way to really talk about and other people who especially use fentanyl, right? To make sure that we're incarcerating them, and we've never been able to incarcerate our way out of it. So, back to harm reduction, you should tour and let us know if you want to. I'm sure we'll get there in a little bit, but we do need overdose prevention sites. Colorado will definitely have one. Denver will definitely have one. I just don't know how many thousands more people have to die of a preventable overdose until we get one.
Thank you, Lisa. Something that Lisa said to me when I did tour the Harm Reduction Action Center earlier this year was that she talks with folks that come into her facility all the time, and folks have been going to Denver Union Station or going on transit and using drugs so that they don't die alone, and that just makes me really emotional. That just like a really systemic failure on our part, on the leadership of the many layers of government that we have. That's the way that people just, that's like the lowest level of connection, like so that I don't die alone. And so I started carrying naloxone, and I talked to my colleagues about it, shared about my own experiences, and hope that you will consider doing that too. It's available free through, I think, DDPHE. Yep. Which brings me to another question here. So we're talking about connection, we're talking about public spaces, and we touched a little bit on how folks have been pushed around. So it was kind of a natural progression. Towards the end of last year, Civic Center Park was closed. There were lots of folks who were spending time there. The park was fenced off, so where did folks go? Denver Union Station. And we keep seeing this in our neighborhoods, just around the city. People keep getting shuffled around. And I just want to know, why can't we just meet people where they are? How can we better serve people in the spaces where they already are? And it sounds like some of that's starting to happen more at Union Station with the Wellness Winnie, the Book Mobile, and other services. But just wondering if anyone wants to kind of pick that up, like what else can we be doing to be serving people where they are? What do we need? Let's ask for, or how we can be doing that. What are some ideas that you've seen, either within your own agencies that just we don't know about, or other examples or things that you would like to see?
Start off. So I think STAR does a good job of meeting people where they're at. We will literally respond anywhere in the city. It doesn't need to be at an address. It could be in a park. It could be at the corner of Broadway and Colfax. We will go, and we will make sure that folks have the support that they need. But also, I think this wasn't part of the question, but I'm gonna
Go ahead.
ask it anyway. So one of the things that I'm seeing about that kind of acts as a barrier to meeting folks where they're at and addressing crises in our unhoused community is a lot of stigmatizing and ostracizing language that's taking place, that folks are service resistant, that folks are from out of state, they're not from here. You know, I get asked that question all the time, and the truth of the matter is that none of that really matters. They're here and they're part of our community. I'm not from Denver. No one's ever asked me, you know, why I'm here, because I'm from out of state. But if you're unhoused, that becomes kind of a hot button issue. So I think one thing that we could probably work on as a city is our messaging and trying to get kind of on the same page as far as folks deserve dignity and respect. They are here and they are members of our community and they matter, and that we really need to do a better job serving our city's most vulnerable. And I would like to see more services like STAR, more services like the library is offering, the outreach at Union Station, because that really is where, you know, like the keynote was talking about, connection is made. And a lot of the folks that we're seeing in our public spaces, they have been burned by the system over and over and over again. They've been promised things that weren't followed through on. They have a history of trauma. This is not a one and done sort of a deal. And you need to keep showing up and you need to keep treating folks with dignity and respect. And not counting how many times you're going out and contacting them and they said no, but waiting for that one time when you get the right fit and the right moment and they say yes, because you're the one person that continued to show up time and time again. So I think that's what I would like to see us focus more on as a city in our public spaces.
And just real quick, I know Councilwoman always pushes forward, we need bathrooms and trash pickup. It's hard to be a good community member when you don't get access to garbage bags, and then nobody from the city will come and pick it up, and they're like, look at this encampment. It's like, well, yeah, but you're not picking up like the used garbage bags. So we have a street outreach team that goes out 3 afternoons a week, and a lot of times we spend rolls and rolls of garbage bags, because people are like, oh my gosh, thank you. I want to be able to pick this up. We're invested in the health and safety. And then I just want to make a quick point to Elizabeth earlier. Our folks register to vote and can use our address. Folks that are unhoused and people who use drugs definitely vote, and especially for elected officials and ballot initiatives that affect their lives. So it's really important that they're a part of community decisions, even though a lot of people don't act like they're a part of the community.
Thank you so much for both of your comments. I think, if anything, you know, I'm sitting at the table and I just was reflecting on what Molly said. I'm the one agency lead, and that's not to minimize you all's role. But I think what we need is courage. Let's not be afraid. Let's stand in your truth. I am a public servant because I basically find great joy in giving more than receiving. So basically it's having the opportunity and lead in. Using the Denver Union Station issue, when I was getting complaints from employees, I reached out to Mayor Hancock's office. You know, I educated myself. I reached out to Lisa. I went over so I could garner a better understanding. And I think it's more or less being empathetic to others' plight, because all of us have a story of which we know nothing about, and if we could get out of our own way, we as a society would be a better place. We're supposed to be one of the richest nations in the world, but yet and still you look around and you see the haves and the, you know, so-called have-nots. And I think, if anything, what I'm trying to do, I don't pride myself on having the expertise you do. I know I'm a public administrator. I know I have 30 years of experience in public transportation, understand strategic planning, government relations, and a myriad of other things. But one thing for certain is that we have commonalities. We're here because we care. And if more people basically put that aside and got rid of the survival of the fittest mentality about where I want to be next, we'd be in a better place. So I'm engaging, trying to have those conversations. As I said to Molly, she's like, we're not going to beat up on you. I said, this is nothing personal, it's strictly business. I'm representing an agency, but I also live in Lodo. I see on a regular basis, and I would say I think fentanyl smells like burnt peanut butter and brake fluid. And for me to know that, It's just unfortunate, right? And to understand what people are going through from the place of being empathetic, that's what we need. Don't be afraid to go. Strength is in numbers. And so I would challenge, if they were here, my peers to step up and have conversations, because it's okay if we don't know. But to the point that you raised, Kaylee, let's get out of our offices. I find the most joy when I go out. I was at one of my divisions and I was talking to one of our controllers in our rail operations center, and he was saying, I know, you have a hard job. Or our operator, who was featured in the Washington Post, she loves her job. I've been getting questions, oh, you should move her to a different route. Let's be clear, she has 10 years of seniority. She bid on that route. She feels as if she's making a difference, but it's easy to pretend it's not there and let's move somewhere else. So I would say it's courage. Stand in your truth.
Thank you for sharing that. I've been thinking a lot about the operators. I've gotten to know some of the union folks pretty well, and just hearing their stories and reading the Washington Post article recently, and just thinking about all that we're asking of transit operators and frontline folks who, like, transit operators do 100,000 jobs and they drive transit safely. We need more community support so that they don't have to do all of those jobs. They also deserve a safe and comfortable work environment. People who are using drugs deserve a safe and comfortable environment. People who live in high-rises downtown deserve a safe and comfortable environment, but not at expense of anyone else's safe and comfortable. Let's see, I think this is kind of a natural transition to this question. We might have time for just a couple more. Talking about collaboration and partnerships and needing courage from other leaders. We're seeing a lot of systemic failures play out in our public spaces. It's not just like, if we fix this one quick thing, this will all be good. It's like 1,000 different things that people are facing, and they have so many different needs, and they change on a daily basis. What partnerships and additional leadership do we need to address these issues in our community as a community? How can we continue to better serve our neighbors? What resources do we need?
I'm going to start with this one, because my favorite kind of community action is community action. It's grassroots. It comes from, I don't want to shirk responsibility, because I think all of us probably feel, and I'm sure Deborah probably, especially lately, feels the weight of responsibility and the weight of our involvement in the community. The only way that anything will change is if conversations around dinner tables and at parties and in churches change, and the way that we understand our response to the community. You said something about Union Station being the city's living room, and I think Deborah's agency has been under a lot of pressure to turn it into like your grandma's living room that nobody uses, and it's covered in plastic, right? Like I think, well, no, yeah, the one that we could never go in.
Yes.
Except on Easter and Christmas. And I think that there are a lot of people that I love in my life that will say one thing, and they'll have a yard sign that says love is love and science is real, or whatever those signs say, and they'll vote a different way, or they'll speak about the problems in our community in a way in their private homes that furthers that kind of division that we see show up in our public spaces. These conflicts that we see at the library on a regular basis, or on public transportation, these don't occur in public spaces. They start at home or wherever you have private space, and are just kind of enacted and brought into full living color. I think this is something that each of us needs to take responsibility for on a community level. Because I think we all sit up here feeling like we've got our finger in the dam and that's all we can do, and nothing is changing. But we're trying, I promise. That's all I got. Yeah.
Okay, Kaylee. Well, I do believe in collaborations, especially on the front lines of the worst overdose crisis we've ever been in. And of course, there's a lot of intersections of homelessness and mental health issues and incarceration and things like that. I do think that we're not really talking about the politics that happens behind the scenes. That can be incredibly frustrating for a lot of frontline service providers. There's a lot of people out there that tell people that work on the front lines that they'll get their 501c3 in trouble if they try to activate at the Capitol or try to push forward with policies. So that's meant to keep people quiet and away from kind of where the decision making is happening. We do know we're in an election season, and what happened with the bad bill is it's happening on the backs of people who use drugs, and after November, no one will think of them again, except the rest of us. And, there was funding in the bill for harm reduction, and it's like, well, yeah, great, thank you. We already had naloxone and fentanyl testing strips for years and years and years. The only thing in this bill was doubling down on incarceration and criminalization. So there are a lot of behind the scenes conversations, and so to Kaylee's point too, is there's so many tables we'll never be invited to, and there's so many opportunities and dinner parties I'm not invited to. I'm really fun though, so feel free to invite me later on. I like an open bar, because it's a safe supply, and we can do it in our consumption site, which is what we're doing tonight. But having those conversations one-on-one, that's the only way the movement is pushed forward. And we do need to start having conversations too, and I'm not usually this gal, about robust prevention, especially for high schoolers and middle schoolers, to have real harm reduction, drug education, because what we're doing is the same thing we're doing with the sex, because it's high risk and it's undereducated. And just because you don't educate about the sex doesn't mean that people aren't having the sex, you know what I mean? Ina Gammy knows. She knows. She watches reality television. But we do need to be having those conversations because, again, everybody's tummy's hurt, and I'm all done with that. I don't want people to die for you to be like, oh, harm reduction, it's not a terrible idea. It's like, yeah, babe, we're doing this. And it's like, join us.
No one wants to follow that.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we do some audience question and answer, I just want to open it up to all four of you. What do you want this room of people who presumably cares about other people with different lived experiences and cares about creating public spaces where people can find belonging, what do you want them to know about your work? What do you... No, Lisa, you have to go last because then no one else is going to answer my question. What do you want them to know about your work? What do you want to ask people? This is a room of community members who are willing to take action. What do you want to tell them?
Oh, get some.
I think from STAR's perspective that we are, and there's a lot of stakeholders involved in STAR. There's Denver 911, there's Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, our contractors, Mental Health Center Denver, and Denver Health, and that really we've all come together to ensure that folks get the right response when they're in crisis. We've historically relied on this one-size-fits-all approach, which hasn't really worked, and really looking at sending the right support at the right moment for folks. And like I said, this often takes place in our public spaces. So just continue to, support those initiatives in Denver. As I know, we've got incredible support from the city, and we appreciate that so much, but just that we are willing to go out and try something new and see if it works or not, and to make sure that the most vulnerable members of our community have resource connection and have support in those tough moments.
Yeah, true. Mine will be short. Whenever I tell someone that I'm a social worker at a library, inevitably the response is, why does the library need a social worker? And I say to that, when was the last time you were at a public library? So that's my ask of you. It's a really remarkable public space. I think it's underutilized by a lot of different groups in the community. Come check out why we have social workers at the library.
For me, recognizing that I'm probably the oddball out in reference to what it is that we do, but public transportation at RTD, we're people who are moving people. And if anything, I would say when you engage, treat our employees with kindness and compassion. It's not just our operators, it's our individuals, cleaning bus stops that are harassed and things of the like, on our right-of-way, folks in customer service as well that are out and about. But recognizing while our core function may be delivering transit service, I bring a different perspective, I really do. Having worked around the country, and we're sitting here talking about this, I remember back in the early 90s when I was working in San Francisco for BART and seeing people, I'm sitting there with the DA and I can look out the window at the fountain and see somebody injecting heroin. So I don't want to appear as if I'm immune to this, but coming into this area and it's like, wow, what's going on? I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I've been doing this for 30 years and I've seen it. But the point of the matter is, let's have these conversations, let's not be fearful. And so as we talk about public transportation and we see the sensationalism that's in the media and it's so scary, think about those frontline individuals that are trying to feed their families each and every day, that are transporting people for the betterment of their lives. So let's take transit, let's rally around that and ensure that we are doing that collectively, because it's not big bad people out there. It's getting back to your point. Do you feel unsafe or are you uncomfortable? Now, Mike.
Okay, just real quick, you gotta carry Narcan, you got it. I know your tummy hurts, you're doing it. Okay, it's happening. Education, we want to talk about and reduce stigma, so you're gonna have somebody that's like, oh, what was going on the other night? I heard they're the worst. And you're like, well, they're not the worst, let's talk about it. I need your help picking up inappropriately discarded syringes. No one's too cute, even you. There's a lot of reasons why there's inappropriately discarded syringes in the community. Getting pricked is very low risk. Pick it up, put it in a pop bottle or a pop can, and toss it. We do have 6 syringe disposals in the community. Find me, I can give you those locations. Also, please, when you're out, pick up those goddamn orange caps. I don't know why they have to be orange caps on these syringes, but I get calls all the time that there's hundreds of syringes in an area and it's 3 orange caps. So please help me out. If you find an orange cap, I need you to pick it up. And then I really need you supporting Harm Reduction 2.0. Harm Reduction 1.0 is vanilla. If you are just kind of coming around to that, cool, catch up, now we're doing 2.0. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Christian, I'm going to turn it over to you for a couple of questions, and then I'll close this out. Do you need this?
No. Keep that. It is not me who has questions, but the audience. I've seen some people writing notes, so raise your hand. I'll try to keep track, and I will come to you. So, anyone have questions? Oh, yeah. So 1, 2. When I come to you, just introduce yourself and then present your question.
Hi, my name is Brian Loma, resident and active member of the community, and thank you all for your work. I think the question really is about bathrooms. I've used Union Station bathrooms without doors in them. I know we could do it now, but more to the bigger point of the question is, how do each of you in your roles in your agencies see the ability or the need to bring that, and how you might envision what public bathrooms look like in the 2.0 version?
I'll start with the short answer. When the Central Library, which is just across the way here, is undergoing a pretty significant renovation, and I can't even tell you how much time and attention was put into the bathrooms because of the sheer number of overdose deaths that or overdoses that security staff and library staff have reversed. This is another reason you should visit the library, because there was a lot of thought put into doors that open out, doors that staff can see under, just as a way to support folks that we know are at risk of overdose in a bathroom. I think that's something that, as we're reckoning with this, and Lisa can support more information here, but it's something that should be part of design for public spaces. It's unfortunate, but it's harm reduction to some level. I don't know, I think that providing access for people to meet their human needs, like biological needs, is important. There are agencies like Headwaters Protectors, find them on Instagram. Ian Tafoya is an incredible leader in the community. I think that we need to focus more on publicly available restrooms as well, and facing those kinds of issues, not just as an organization, as the library, or as RTD, but as a larger community.
Yeah, so to dovetail off Kaylee, I can't tell you how many indecent exposure calls we responded to on STAR where someone was simply utilizing the restroom in an alley, and how many calls for service and how many first responders spend time and resources responding to those calls, which, you know, is just someone trying to take care of a biological need. What a financial kind of waste of money that is. You're, you know, increasing police contact that folks are having, and, you know, now STAR is able to respond to those, but, you know, we also could be responding to someone who's in behavioral health crisis and not just trying to find somewhere to use the restroom. So I think, you know, that is sort of my 2 cents on public bathrooms. It's creating a lot of calls for service in the emergency response space.
So, there's a rule, Lisa is always going to go last. So as we look at public restrooms, I would agree that it's collective in the sense it's not just about Denver Union Station, but I will share what I found to be most helpful years ago living in a different geographic area that had a lot of activity, and I'm speaking more or less about the San Francisco Bay Area, where basically we had self-cleaning restrooms, that there was a time allotment and you go in, you come out, and you know, those were easily manageable, and we generated revenue for the city and county of San Francisco because it was done through an advertising contract. And so there's a lot of different ways that that money could be fed back into the services that are needed, you know, for the greater community in which we're serving.
Well, and I would just say, Brian, especially the bathroom stuff is so weird. It's just so weird in general. Like, nobody likes being a bathroom monitor. If anybody's ever been to the King Supers at 13th and Spear, they have blue lights in their bathroom. They have blue lights in your bathroom so you can't find your veins because they had so many overdoses happen in there. But that doesn't mean you can't use a cell phone light, right, or go intramuscular. So it's a blue light, which I want to believe they use other lights to clean with, and a locked door. And if you ask somebody for the code, they won't tell it to you, right? They'll walk you to it, they'll unlock it, they'll stand outside. That's a staff capacity issue, right? We do know in most of the overnight men's shelters in Denver, they don't have bathroom doors on their stalls because they've had so many overdoses happen. So when we started working, especially with Denver City Council in November or 2018, we have a very robust business coalition that says bathroom stuff is weird, and I get really nervous that people are injecting in our bathrooms. So what I would encourage, well, and there's 2 mobile bathrooms, there might be a couple more now, that were so controversial years ago, and it's like, I think we can all agree that we can all connect on bathroom stuff. But they have monitors. That's happening in other states too, and that's something obviously we're supportive of. I do appreciate Kaylee's, you know, being able to see the feet. I'm the gal now in the bathroom that if your feet don't move, I might say something, and then they're like, I'm fine. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm in the industry, you know. But I don't like the bathrooms that we stand up and then you're like looking at. I don't like that. I don't like that. But I think there's a lot of bathroom issues that nobody wants to talk about because it hurts your tummy, right? And everything should just be fine. But there's so many people that are struggling because we've all had that moment where we've run into some place and be like, I swear to God, I'll buy something. What's the code to the bathroom? And then after a while, they're like, are you doing okay? Fumbling for the key. 3 to 5 minutes without oxygen is very problematic, and an opioid overdose is lack of oxygen. So there are a lot of people dying in bathrooms, which is why there's kind of this lockdown, which is why we have gotten quite a bit of support from churches, in particular in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, because they were one of the only unlocked bathrooms in town. And then, you know, church secretaries are there by themselves during the week, and so they were afraid people would come in and use, and then the church secretary would find somebody too. So these are larger conversations that we need to be having. We don't support blue lights, but we can understand why people would do that.
Thank you for that. Next question, please introduce yourself and present your question.
All right. I have to introduce myself. Okay, I'm Emily Kleinfelter. I'm the Safety and Regional Vision Zero Plan with Dr. Cog, but I'm also just here as an advocate. And I really was touched by the story in the Washington Post about the 15 bus driver, and you know, the comment we had talked about how people will ride on the bus so that they don't have to die alone, basically. And so that made me think about harm reduction, and if we have been educating bus drivers about Narcan and naloxone and having access to those things, and if that's already something that's done, or that's going to be done. And then also, I guess it's a two-part question with STAR. I think that this is correct that you guys are expanding to try and become 24/7, because one of the things that I've wanted to call STAR multiple times, but unfortunately it's always been after hours, and that's something that I've found to be a barrier for me to use it, is that every time, and then I don't know what to do because I don't feel comfortable calling our police force, and don't know how to deal with the situation. And I'm not equipped to step in either, so. It's a two-part question, sorry.
No, sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question in referencing operators in a care bay. First and foremost, as we look at things holistically, we have launched a training program that kicked off as relates to videos and things of the like, to ensure that there's an understanding as we talk about Narcan. No, not everybody's using it. However, with our police department and our third-party contractor, your question is serendipitous. Let's just have a conversation today as we're looking to modify said contract that'll say that they must, carry Narcan. And so those are the steps that we're taking. It's going to take some time. There's a lack of comfort with some individuals, and are we Big Brother trying to dictate what they need to do, especially for frontline operators that are represented by a labor union. And so what does that mean for them, and how are we going to train them, and what are the repercussions if in fact, they're not saving a life? So there's a myriad of different issues that, are incorporated into the decisions whether or not we're going to, impose that, and that would be, a subject that is bargainable under the collective bargaining agreement as well.
We'll get them there.
So there's a few kind of details I want to make sure that I hit on all the pieces of your question. So if I miss anything, let me know. But so currently STAR is running 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week, and that's an expansion from our pilot that was running downtown from 10 to 6, Monday through Friday. Recognizing that crises happen outside of the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. The reason that we chose that time frame to put our initial wave of expansion resources is that the data shows that is our highest call volume time. That mimics the overall call volume of Denver. Our population grows Monday through Friday business hours, and there's more calls. So, we were lucky enough to get funding to buy 5 additional vans to add to our fleet of one little pilot van that we were running for quite a while. And then once we get those resources in place, we can look at the data, make sure we're meeting the need of our highest call volume time, and then yes, I think absolutely it is trending to go 24/7, because we want to make sure that folks have access to the right response overnight. I recognize that maybe doesn't exactly solve your problem currently, but that's what we're working towards, with one of our biggest barriers being that the vans were ordered in September and they are still not here yet. They told me that they're being here in August, and also told me that these estimates essentially mean nothing. So we were lucky enough to get some loaner vans from MHCD and from Denver Health to be able to, not put a hold on those resources that are in place, but kind of starting to think ahead of, like, if we need to expand beyond this, or we need to expand 24/7, we need to probably order those vehicles now. We also, we do have social workers that work downtown 24/7 that ride with DPD. I recognize that that's not necessarily always the right response for the situations that you're encountering, but that those resources are also available. So we're kind of slowly ramping up to eventually meet that 24/7 model.
One little follow-up is that
sure.
The calls, are those calls that are made by people that are requesting the service, or those like for themselves, or those being made by community members that are requesting for the service for someone else? Because I think there's a big difference in that. and somebody that's out?
Yeah, so we don't, that's all STAR calls citywide. So since the beginning of the pilot, 911 Communications has been flagging calls that were STAR appropriate, whether STAR was on, available or on shift or not. So we have a really good idea of what the need looks like citywide. The truth is that a lot of our calls are third-party calls, you know? It's folks who are sleeping in a business doorway and the business owner wants to open up and they're calling. But we want to show up for those people too, right? Because if we don't show up, it's a traditional first responder, and that's just not the right response. So, you know, we really just don't differentiate. We just look at whether STAR needed to be there or not.
All right, I think we have time for one more one-part question.
I was about to ask you, did she answer your question? But
Emily's not allowed to have any more questions.
I'm not saying that. Please introduce yourself and present your question.
I'm Sharita Hadnal, and I am the Beaver Block Captain Program Director for the Stapleton Foundation for Sustainable Urban Communities. We drive Stapleton. But my question is, I'm hearing a lot about what we're doing after the fact, and I understand, like, if somebody's already in a place of addiction, we have to deal with that. But I'm curious as to how or what kind of work is being done. I heard some mention about MHCD, and I'm not familiar with a lot of the different organizations that provide counseling services and actual treatment. But I guess what I'm wondering is, where is the intersection between, like, the actual counseling and the treatment going on, so that we're not just dealing with it afterwards, but that we're looking at how the actual reduction in addicts and the increase in recovering addicts is going, because it seems like, I mean, this could be a never-ending story. So is there work being done in terms of collaboration among all of these different entities to actually look at what type of treatment options and where are the root causes of these addictions coming from, and how do we start to address that versus just saying, let's keep you alive to continue to use? I mean, I'm not saying that it's not important to keep people alive, but I mean, to what end?
Well, and I will say, I can't help anyone or get them into treatment if they're not alive. So I think that's a huge part of what we're doing. I think another important initiative to highlight is the Caring for Denver Foundation, which created a new tax in the city and county, 25 cents on every $100 spent, to go directly to seed programs that would directly address behavioral health and substance misuse. I don't think you could talk to any service provider in the city that wouldn't say we need more substance use treatment. That's definitely a gap in our services, but those are conversations that are being had, and it's not that they don't exist. It's just a very individualized process, substance use treatment and prevention, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all, just say no kind of approach. So making sure that we have the myriad of approaches that we need to meet the needs of our community, I think, is something that we're still working towards.
I think it's a very tall ask to ask our unhoused neighbors to be sober with all the crisis management that happens on the streets. We do have a lot of folks who use meth who do so in the winter so they don't have to go into the shelter, so they can walk around the city and not lay down and freeze to death. So a lot of times using meth in our community is a survival method. One of the #1 substance use treatments we have for meth use is housing. They don't need to use this chaotically anymore. I like that back to you. Inpatient's a story of hope. Nobody goes to inpatient anymore. Medicaid still doesn't have a rollout. We have social detox. We don't have medical detox. The only inpatient we really have in Denver is Denver Cares Detox, and they're inpatient. And that's a lot of times where they send unruly people who drink. So a lot of people don't want to be on the floor and writhing in pain, because withdrawal is physically painful from opioids. It's physically painful. The flu times 1,000. So there's a lot of kind of issues that happen with that. Now, medication-assisted treatments such as methadone, Suboxone, Vivitrol, that's the gold standard now. We do have quite a few more clinics, but clinics have a very hard time. You would think people would want treatment community, clinics in their community. They have a very difficult time getting into neighborhoods and their treatment. I sometimes have to move around. Try moving a syringe exchange around town. You know what I mean? So that's very difficult, and there's virtually nothing for stimulant users besides housing for cocaine, crack, and meth. So a lot of times, I get the question about treatment, and we have to be very clear too. Not all drug use is chaotic. There's chaotic and non-chaotic, problematic and non-problematic. And oftentimes, managed use is completely possible with heroin, meth, and cocaine. The problem is, and fentanyl, the problem is that's an unpredictable drug supply. Much like managed use is possible for alcohol. That just happens to be a safe supply, and that's predictable. Some people will have one beverage at the bar tonight. Somebody had 9, right? And they're going to get up and they're going to go to work tomorrow too. So, people use drugs. People have used drugs forever and ever and ever in a day, and not everybody's going to use for the rest of their life. Some people might though. And we just have to be okay with that, because also nothing dulls the voices of schizophrenia quite like heroin and fentanyl. And we don't have the mental health system that we deserve, that people deserve, to oftentimes get the medication that they need, also when they're in and out of incarceration too. A lot of times, my folks have felonies, and if you have a felony within 7 years, violent or not, in Denver, it's very difficult to obtain housing. And oftentimes they're like, well, it's not violent, might as well have been. So a lot of times when people are in encampments or using chaotically, it's because they have that felony where it's very difficult to get a job and housing, and now we don't understand why people aren't flourishing. So, treating drug use as a criminal legal issue has never served us well, and it's gotten us into the worst overdose crisis we've ever been in, with the most unpredictable drug supply. So we're absolutely positively keeping folks alive today so they can see the sunrise tomorrow.
It's a t-shirt moment. I'm going to summarize. Decriminalize drugs. That's it. Housing is one solution. Decriminalize it. It doesn't make sense on the face upon first first feeling. You think, wow, if we decriminalize drugs, wouldn't everybody go do drugs? I've never really had an intention to use heroin. And I don't think the law is stopping me. You know what I mean? Anyone who wants to use a substance hasn't ever said, I really would use heroin, but it's illegal. So I better not decriminalize drugs and vote for elected officials who support that, because you'll get me out of a job, which I would like. Thank you.
All right, friends, I'm going to close this out here. Do we have anything else? Okay. I just want to thank you all for being here, for showing up, for engaging in this conversation. I want to thank our panelists for being open, showing up, and being vulnerable and honest with us. And I jotted down something that Lisa said. Everyone needs someone rooting for them. I hope that everyone in this room can be rooting for someone. I hope that you show up to spaces where you can be asking leaders to be the people who are rooting for people, who are rooting for our neighbors, who are advocating for policies that improve people's lives. Because we know that there's a lot of systemic failures showing up here, in that people are using drugs in public so they don't have to die alone, that people are using drugs to stay alive in the winter. That there's just so many things that we're facing right now, and people need each other. We need to keep showing up. Please continue to challenge your own ideas and biases and perceptions of homelessness, of mental illness, of drug use. It's something that I've worked a lot on. I have personal experience with people who use drugs in my life. I was taught all the things to say no to drugs. Drugs are bad. Using drugs is a choice. And those are all things that I've been spending a lot of time getting uncomfortable with myself, and I hope that those are things that you'll continue to challenge within yourselves as well. I'm going to turn it over to Nika Kay and Elizabeth, who are going to lead us through some more some networking, but I hope that our panelists will stay around. Please feel free to ask them some questions during this next time, but thank you so much for being here and participating in this conversation.